Brooklyn Hayes stared at her reflection in the steamy bathroom mirror, trying to convince herself she wasn't making a mistake. Drops of water ran down her neck as she ran her fingers through her brown hair, still damp from the shower. "It's just a blind date," she muttered to herself. What could go wrong? Madison, her best friend since art school in Connecticut, had spent the last 3 weeks insisting on this meeting. "He's perfect for you, Brooke. He works with numbers, is reserved, loves contemporary art. Trust me," were the words that echoed in his mind as he applied a discreet pink lipstick. The modest Brooklyn apartment, decorated with colorful canvases painted by her PS 234 students, perfectly reflected her life. Simple, authentic, and full of creativity. Brooklyn loved teaching art to elementary school children, even if it meant living on a shoestring budget in one of New York's most expensive neighborhoods. Wearing her favorite jeans and a navy blue silk blouse, her only concession to the formality of the occasion, Brooklyn checked the accountant's social media profile once again. Alexander Morrison, 34, finance graduate from NYU, discreet photos at corporate events. Nothing too revealing, but nothing worrying either. The intercom rang at precisely 7 p.m., making your heart skip a beat. Going down the stairs of the building without an elevator, Brooklyn took a deep breath, preparing himself for a probably boring dinner at some restaurant in the neighborhood. But when he opened the front door, his entire reality shifted. A tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit, stood next to a black limousine. His piercing green eyes met hers with a disconcerting intensity. It wasn't Alexander Morrison. This man she knew, or rather, everyone knew, from the newspapers and business magazines. "Miss Hayes," he said in a deep, melodious voice. "I'm Harrington Caldwell III. I hope you don't mind the little dissimulation." Brooklyn felt her legs wobble. Harrington Caldwell III was the CEO of Caldtech, the largest technology company in the country. His face frequently graced the covers of magazines such as Forbes and Time, and his fortune was estimated to be in the billions. What was he doing there? Madison, she stuttered, unable to form a coherent sentence. A discreet smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Your friend Madison works in the legal department at my company. When she mentioned that she had a friend I should meet, I confess I was intrigued, but I asked her to keep my identity a secret." Brooklyn looked at her simple outfit, feeling completely inadequate. "I'm not dressed for—" "You're perfect," he interrupted gently. "In fact, your authenticity was one of the things Madison emphasized most about you." Before Brooklyn could protest, Harrington opened the limo door. "I have a dinner reservation, but not in New York. Are you up for a little adventure?" The art teacher bit her lip, torn between the impulse to run back to her safe apartment and the overwhelming desire to find out where this madness could take her. "Where exactly?" "Paris," he replied matter-of-factly, as if suggesting dinner in the next block. "My jet is waiting, and Le Jules Verne, at the top of the Eiffel Tower, is waiting for us for dinner." The world seemed to revolve around Brooklyn. His rational mind screamed that this was insane, that he shouldn't get in a car with a stranger, much less fly to another continent. But there was something in Harrington's eyes, a mix of hope and vulnerability behind the confident facade, that made her hesitate. Why all this elaboration? Why not just be honest from the beginning? Harrington ran a hand through his dark hair, a surprisingly human gesture for someone so powerful. "Because I'm tired of people who only see my bank account. I wanted to meet someone who could see beyond that. Someone who was interested in the person, not the billionaire." Brooklyn felt her heart speed up. It was crazy, completely irrational, potentially dangerous, and yet incredibly tempting. Madison knew this man. She worked for him. That offered some security, didn't it? "I have class tomorrow at 8 a.m., she said, trying to find one last anchor of rationality. "I can guarantee you'll be back in time," he promised, still holding the door open. "So, Miss Hayes, are you ready for an extraordinary evening?" Brooklyn looked one last time at his familiar building, at his orderly, predictable life, and then back at Harrington. With a nervous smile, she took a step towards the limo. "I think so," he replied, feeling his heart pound against his chest. "But please call me Brooklyn." As the limo glided through the streets of New York toward the airport, Brooklyn tried to process the surreal turn his life had taken in the last 10 minutes. Beside her, Harrington watched her with a genuine interest that seemed to contradict everything she had ever read about the ruthless business titan. One thing was certain. This wouldn't be the boring blind date she had imagined. In fact, as New York City fell behind, Brooklyn had the distinct feeling that his life would never be the same. The limo's luxurious interior made Brooklyn feel like he had stepped through a portal into another dimension. The pristine Italian leather and gentle scent of sandalwood contrasted sharply with her apartment littered with used brushes and unfinished canvases. Harrington was sitting across from her, his green eyes studying her with a genuine curiosity that made her blush. "So, Brooklyn," he began, pouring 2 glasses of champagne, "Madison told me that you transform children's lives through art." The mention of his work helped Brooklyn regain some of its balance. "It's more like they transformed my life," he replied, accepting the cup. "Every child has a unique way of seeing the world. My job is just to give them the tools to express that vision." A genuine smile lit up Harrington's face. "Interesting. Most people I know are more concerned with how to make a fortune than with making a difference." "What about you?" Brooklyn asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Caldtech is known for its technological innovations, but what is the purpose behind it all?" The question seemed to catch Harrington off guard. For a moment, his polished CEO mask faltered, revealing something more vulnerable beneath. "Technology has the power to democratize opportunities," he responded after a reflective pause. "My goal is to create tools that enable ordinary people to do extraordinary things." The limousine slowed down as it entered a private area of Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Brooklyn watched through the window as they approached a sleek private jet, its aerodynamic lines gleaming under the runway lights. "I still can't believe I'm about to fly to Paris for dinner," she muttered, half to herself. "You can back out at any time," Harrington offered gently. "I can take you back home right now." Brooklyn turned to face him. "Why me? Of all the women in New York, why pick an art teacher who can barely pay her rent?" "Because when Madison showed me your art blog," he responded, surprising her again, "I saw someone who sees beauty where others see only the ordinary. Your analyses of contemporary art are profound yet accessible. You have a gift for translating complexity into something everyone can understand and appreciate." Brooklyn's heart quickened. She had maintained that blog for years, more as a hobby than anything else, never imagining that a billionaire CEO would be among her readers. When they walked up the plane's stairs, Brooklyn was greeted by an interior that looked like something out of a glossy magazine. Cream leather armchairs, fine wood details, and minimalist but elegant decor. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Hayes," an impeccably dressed flight attendant greeted them. "We take off in 5 minutes. Please make yourself comfortable." As they settled in, Brooklyn noticed a small art gallery set up on one of the walls of the plane. Her eyebrows rose as she recognized works by emerging contemporary artists she had highlighted on her blog. "You actually read my blog," she said admiringly. "Every word," Harrington confirmed, watching her examine the works. "Your recommendations have shaped my private collection over the past few months." The plane began to taxi, and Brooklyn felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. It was really happening. She was about to cross the Atlantic with a man she had met less than an hour ago. During takeoff, Harrington began talking about his own journey, how he took over the family business at age 25 after his father's untimely death, the pressures of leading a global corporation at such a young age, and how technology has always been his refuge. "Most people assume I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth," he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "They don't see the sleepless nights, the impossible decisions, the weight of having thousands of employees depending on their choices." Brooklyn realized he was seeing beyond the powerful CEO's facade, catching a glimpse of the man behind the headlines. "It must be lonely," she observed softly. That's why I needed this disguise, he admitted. I wanted someone to know me as a person, not as a newspaper headline. The next few hours passed in a blur of deep conversations, genuine laughter, and mutual discoveries. Brooklyn shared stories about her students, her artistic dreams, her struggles as a teacher in an expensive city. Harrington talked about technological innovations, his visions for the future, and the small moments of normalcy he treasured. When the pilot announced that they were approaching Paris, Brooklyn could hardly believe that they had already crossed the ocean. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, painting the clouds with soft shades of pink and gold. You know what's funny? She said, watching the sunrise through the window. If you had been honest about who you were from the beginning, I probably would have canceled the date. Why? Harrington asked, genuinely curious. Because I would have assumed we were from two different worlds to have anything in common, she answered honestly. But now, he encouraged, leaning slightly towards you. Now I realize that maybe the differences aren't as important as the things we share. Harrington's smile lit up his entire face, transforming the powerful CEO into something much more approachable and human. Exactly what I hoped you would find out, he said softly. The plane began its descent over Paris, the city of light awakening in the dawn. Brooklyn knew she was embarking on something much bigger than a simple blind date. But for the first time since getting into that limo, she didn't feel afraid of the unknown. She was curious to find out where this adventure would take her. The morning sun bathed Paris in golden tones as the car waiting for them at Charles de Gaulle Airport glided through the city's historic streets. Brooklyn watched through the window, still trying to process the surreal reality of being on the other side of the Atlantic just hours after leaving his modest Brooklyn apartment. I thought we were going straight to the Eiffel Tower, she commented when she realized they were heading in another direction. Harrington smiled, that same enigmatic smile that was already starting to make his heart race. Dinner is only at night. I thought we could enjoy the day exploring some less conventional places. The car stopped in front of an old building in the Marais, one of the most artistic neighborhoods in Paris. This is Vincent Dubois' studio, Harrington explained as he opened the door for her. He's one of the artists you mentioned in your blog as criminally underrated. Brooklyn felt her cheeks flush. You really paid attention to every detail, didn't you? When something, or someone, interests me, I like to do my homework properly, he replied, guiding her into the building. The studio was a large, bright space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light. Huge canvases, some still in the process of being created, occupied the walls. In the center of the space, a middle-aged man with an ink-stained apron was waiting for them. Monsieur Caldwell, Vincent exclaimed in a thick French accent. And that must be the art criticism I admire so much. Brooklyn gaped. Do you read my blog? Your analysis of my Urban Fragments series was the most insightful I've ever read, Vincent responded, leading them through the studio. You saw beyond the colors and shapes. You got to the essence of what I was trying to express. The next 2 hours were a dream for Brooklyn. Vincent showed her creative process, discussed techniques, and even invited her to put a few strokes on a canvas in progress. Harrington was watching from a distance, clearly pleased with her enthusiasm. How did you organize all this? Brooklyn asked as they left the studio. Caldtech has a digital art division that works with Vincent, Harrington explained, but I confess I had to make some extra connections to fix this particular encounter. The rest of the morning passed like a whirlwind of extraordinary experiences. They visited galleries hidden in historic alleys, sampled croissants in a century-old bakery, and walked through secret gardens known only to locals. Over lunch at a charming cafe on the banks of the Seine, Brooklyn noticed how Harrington became more and more relaxed in his company. The imposing CEO gave way to a man who laughed easily and spoke passionately about his most personal projects. You know what impresses me most? She said as they enjoyed coffee after the meal. You could have tried to impress me with grand gestures and expensive places, but you chose to show me places that really mean something to me. It's because I'm not trying to impress you, Brooklyn, he replied, his green eyes boring into hers. I'm trying to get to know you. The afternoon brought more surprises. They visited a small museum dedicated to digital art, where Harrington revealed some of the revolutionary projects Caltech was developing to democratize access to art. Brooklyn was fascinated by how technology and creativity could intertwine in innovative ways. As the sun began to set, Harrington took her to a boutique hotel so they could get ready for dinner. An elegant black dress and shoes that looked custom-made awaited her in the bedroom. Madison helped me with the measurements, he explained when Brooklyn expressed her surprise. I hope you don't mind. The dress fit perfectly, making Brooklyn feel like a more glamorous version of herself without losing her essence. When he went downstairs to meet Harrington in the lobby, his breathing hitched for a moment. He looked even more impressive in his tuxedo, but it was his look of genuine admiration that made her heart skip a beat. You look stunning, he said softly, offering his arm. On the way to the Eiffel Tower, Brooklyn reflected on how his life had completely changed in less than 24 hours. She was still the same art teacher who was passionate about her work, but now she found herself immersed in a world she had never imagined accessing. What are you thinking about? Harrington asked, noticing her contemplative silence. How reality sometimes surpasses any fiction, she answered honestly, and how I'm curiously not scared by it all. Perhaps because, despite the extraordinary circumstances, what is happening between us is quite natural. Brooklyn nodded, realizing the truth in those words. Behind the lavish setting and elaborate surprises, there was a genuine connection developing, something that transcended social status or bank account. The car stopped at the base of the Eiffel Tower, now illuminated against the Paris night sky. As they walked up to Le Jules Verne restaurant, Brooklyn couldn't help but think that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple blind date. And for the first time in her life, she was perfectly okay with not knowing exactly where this journey would take her. The Le Jules Verne restaurant was a spectacle of elegance and sophistication, with its panoramic windows offering a stunning view of illuminated Paris. Brooklyn felt transported to a world of dreams as the maitre d' led them to their table, strategically positioned to provide a privileged view of the city. I've been here several times on business, Harrington commented as he pulled out the chair for her. But I've never really appreciated the view. It's different when you're with someone who sees beauty in every detail. The sommelier approached with a bottle of vintage champagne, and Brooklyn couldn't help but notice how the staff treated Harrington with a respectful familiarity that suggested frequent visits. As the glasses were being served, she realized she needed to address the elephant in the room. Harrington, she began, twirling the glass gently between her fingers. Why me? And don't tell me it's just because of my art blog. There must be hundreds of more established art critics in New York. He watched her for a moment, as if carefully considering her response. You're right. It wasn't just the blog, he finally admitted. Madison showed me a video of you teaching. It was a painting session with your fourth graders where you were teaching about Van Gogh. Brooklyn remembered that day. I had organized a special class on The Starry Night, where each child created their own interpretation of the masterpiece. What caught my attention, he continued, was how you dealt with a boy who was frustrated because his painting wasn't perfect. You knelt down next to him and said something that stuck with me. True art is not in perfection, but in the courage to show the world how you see things. Brooklyn's heart sank as she realized he had paid so much attention to such a specific moment in his professional life. In that moment, Harrington continued, I saw someone who understood something that took me years to learn, that authenticity is more valuable than perfection. In my world, Brooklyn, everyone is trying to look perfect, to be perfect. It's exhausting. The waiter arrived with the entree, a culinary masterpiece that Brooklyn was hesitant to disturb with her cutlery, providing a brief moment of respite from the emotionally charged conversation. So you've decided to bring me to Paris for an elaborate dinner? She teased gently, trying to ease the tension. It doesn't seem very authentic to me. Harrington laughed. a rich, genuine sound that drew discreet glances from neighboring tables. Touché. But you see, I wanted to impress you, yes. The difference is, I wanted to impress you by being myself, not just the CEO of Caldtech. And who are you again? Harrington Caldwell III, Brooklyn asked, leaning forward slightly. Someone who grew up with crushing expectations on their shoulders, he replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Someone who has learned to build walls so high that sometimes they forget what it's like to really let people get close. Dinner progressed with a delicate dance of revelations and discoveries. Brooklyn spoke about her childhood in Connecticut, where her teacher parents taught her the value of education and art. Harrington shared stories about Caldtech's early days, when he slept in the office and ate ramen noodles to save the company every penny. You know what's ironic? Brooklyn commented as they enjoyed dessert, a chocolate souffle that practically melted in the mouth. You tried to hide who you were so I could get to know the real you, but I guess I only really got to know you after I found out the truth. Like this? Because now I can see the contrast between the Harrington the world knows and the man who organizes surprise visits to artist studios because he read on an obscure blog that someone admired them. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the soft music that floated through the restaurant and the distant clink of glasses. Brooklyn, Harrington said finally, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability she hadn't yet heard. I need to be honest about something. This day, this meeting, wasn't just a one-time experience for me. I want to get to know you better. I want to explore what's going on between us. But, she encouraged, feeling there was more to come. But my life is complicated. The press, the constant commitments, the expectations. It wouldn't be fair not to warn you about it. Brooklyn took a sip of her wine, allowing herself a moment to collect her thoughts. Do you know what I teach my students about contemporary art? That sometimes the most valuable things are also the most challenging to understand at first glance. Harrington's face lit up with a knowing smile. Are you comparing me to a work of contemporary art? Maybe, she replied with a mischievous smile. What I'm saying is that I'm not afraid of challenges, Harrington. What scares me is not trying something that could be extraordinary. When they left the restaurant, Paris had transformed into a sea of twinkling lights beneath them. In the elevator going down the Eiffel Tower, Brooklyn felt Harrington's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. So, he said softly, are you ready to explore the extraordinary? Brooklyn squeezed his hand gently, his heart full of possibilities. I think I've already started. The flight back to New York was different from the previous one. The atmosphere was charged with a newfound intimacy, conversations flowing with a naturalness that made it seem like Brooklyn and Harrington had known each other for years, not hours. The dark sky over the Atlantic was beginning to show the first signs of dawn, painting the horizon with soft tones of pink and gold. How are you going to explain to your students where you've been? Harrington asked, pouring Brooklyn another glass of tea as she settled into her seat on the plane. The truth, she replied with a mischievous smile. That I went to dinner in Paris. They'll think it's just another one of my stories made up to inspire them to dream big. Harrington laughed, but his face soon took on a more serious expression. Brooklyn, there's something I need to show you. He picked up his tablet, and after a few taps on the screen, turned it towards her. The page showed several headlines from gossip sites. Caldtech CEO spotted with mysterious brunette in Paris. Who is Harrington Caldwell III's new conquest? French romance. Billionaire takes teacher to dinner at the Eiffel Tower. Brooklyn's heart quickened. The photos, although a little grainy, clearly showed the two leaving Le Jules Verne. In one of them, the moment their hands met in the elevator had been captured in perfect detail. This, Harrington said softly, is just the beginning. If we continue to see each other, your life will change drastically. The paparazzi will find out where you live, where you work. They will dig into your past, interview your exes, speculate about your intentions. Brooklyn felt a lump form in his throat. My students. Exactly. He nodded. That's why I needed to show you this now. You need to be prepared for what lies ahead. If you decide it's too much, I completely understand. For a few moments, Brooklyn was silent, processing the implications. Her hands shook slightly as she held the tablet, watching how the world was already weaving its own narratives about her. Have you been through this before? She asked finally. With other women? Harrington ran a hand through her hair, a gesture she already recognized as a sign of discomfort. Yes. My last serious relationship ended because she couldn't handle the pressure. Rachel was a marketing executive, used to a certain level of exposure, but still. What happened? She started to change. She became obsessed with her public image, with what people were saying about her on social media. In the end, I realized that I had lost the woman I fell in love with to a manufactured version of herself. Brooklyn handed the tablet back to Harrington and stood up, walking to the plane window. The sun now definitively emerged over the horizon, bathing the clouds in golden light. Far below, the ocean stretched endlessly, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the choices it offered. You know what's funny? She said without turning around. I have always taught my students that true art requires courage. Courage to expose yourself, to be vulnerable, to show the world who you really are. She turned to face him. It would be hypocritical of me to back down now just because I'm afraid of what people will think. Harrington stood up and walked over to her, his hands finding hers. It wouldn't be hypocrisy. It would be self-preservation, and I would completely respect your decision. But that's not what you want, she observed, studying his green eyes. No, he admitted. What I want is to wake up every morning knowing that I can call you and hear about what masterpiece your students created today. I want to share discoveries of up-and-coming artists with you and see your eyes light up with possibility. I want more moments like the ones we had in Paris, where I can just be Harrington, not the CEO of Caldtech. Brooklyn felt her heart race at the intensity of his words. Then let's set some rules, she said firmly. First, my classroom is a media-free zone. No photographers, no speculation. My students deserve a safe environment to create. Absolutely, Harrington agreed. I can have my legal team prepare a series of protective measures. Monday, she continued, I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to continue wearing jeans to work, buying art supplies on sale, and taking the subway. A smile formed on Harrington's lips. I wouldn't expect anything different. His authenticity is what attracted me in the first place. And third, Brooklyn concluded, we need to be honest with each other, always. If at any point it gets too much for either of us, we need to say it. Done, he replied, pulling her closer. Any other conditions? Yes, she smiled. You're going to have to teach me how to handle all this cutlery at fancy dinners. I still have no idea which fork to use for what. Harrington's laugh filled the plane's cabin, heartfelt and warm. I think I can fix this. The captain announced that they were beginning the descent to New York. Brooklyn returned to his seat, buckling his seatbelt and reflecting on how his life had transformed in the last 24 hours. The sun was now shining fully, a new day beginning with promises of adventures and challenges she had never imagined facing. Ready to take on the world? Harrington asked, extending his hand onto the armrest between them. Brooklyn intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the strength and comfort of that simple touch. With you? I'm ready for anything. The return to reality was like a shock of cold water for Brooklyn. When he arrived at his apartment after his flight from Paris, he found a small crowd of photographers waiting on the sidewalk. Harrington, anticipating the situation, had arranged discreet security who escorted her through the photo-eager group. Miss Hayes, is it true that you and Harrington Caldwell III are engaged? Brooklyn, how did a teacher win the most eligible man in New York? How long have you been secretly together? The questions followed her to the door of the building, where she finally found refuge. Inside her apartment, Brooklyn leaned against the closed door and took a deep breath, trying to process how her life had changed so drastically in just 48 hours. Your phone wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications, dozens of friend requests on social media, messages from people who hadn't spoken to her in years, and even some interview proposals. Most worrying were the emails from the school administration. "We need to discuss the current situation and its impact on the school environment," Principal Thompson's message read. Brooklyn sat on her worn couch, surrounded by unfinished canvases and scattered brushes, remnants of her normal life from just 2 days ago. Her cell phone rang, and Madison's name appeared on the screen. "You have a lot to explain to me, young lady." Her friend's voice sounded excited on the other end of the line. "Paris? Really?" "Mad. You knew who he was all along," Brooklyn accused, but couldn't help but smile. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have canceled right away," Madison replied. "And besides, Harry swore me to secrecy. I've never seen him so interested in someone before, Brooke." "Harry?" Brooklyn raised an eyebrow. "You guys seem pretty close in the legal department." "Don't change the subject. How was it?" "The gossip sites are crazy, but I want to hear the real story." Brooklyn began to recount the surreal events of the past 24 hours, but was interrupted by a knock on the door. Through the peephole, he saw his neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, holding a newspaper. "Honey, you're on every page," the lady exclaimed as soon as Brooklyn opened the door. "My granddaughter researched everything about you on the internet. Is it true that you teach art classes to underprivileged children?" "I teach art classes to all the kids, Mrs. Martinez," Brooklyn replied gently, taking the proffered newspaper. On the front page of the society section, there was a photo of her and Harrington leaving Le Jules Verne. After politely dismissing her neighbor, Brooklyn returned to the couch and looked over the article. It speculated about her modern fairy tale and how a simple art teacher had captured the heart of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. His phone rang again. This time it was Harrington. "How are you handling everything?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "Honestly, still processing," she replied. "There are paparazzi in front of my building. My director wants to have an urgent meeting, and apparently I am now a modern Cinderella, according to the New York Post." "I can send more security if you need it," he offered. "And as for the school, my legal team can—" "No," Brooklyn interrupted him softly. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to deal with this in my own way. It's my kids, my school. I need to maintain some normalcy." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "You're amazing, you know that," Harrington finally said. "Most people would be demanding a new apartment or asking me to solve all their problems." "Well, I'm not most people," she smiled. "Besides, I'm still trying to get used to the idea that I had dinner in Paris last night." "Speaking of dinner," he began, "would you like to meet tonight? Something low-key, just the two of us. I know a perfect place." Brooklyn hesitated, looking at the pile of her students' work she needed to grade. "I have a lot of work to do." "We can order food and I'll help you correct your work," he suggested, surprising her. "I promise to be an excellent teacher's assistant." The mental image of Harrington Caldwell III, billionaire CEO, evaluating elementary school children's drawings made Brooklyn laugh. "Okay, but you'll have to use the appropriate rating scale. No decimals or very technical analyses." "Deal," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Brooklyn went to the window and peeked through the curtain. Photographers were still there, some talking to pedestrians, probably gathering information about her. Her cell phone vibrated with a text message from her mother. "Honey, your dad is freaking out after seeing you on the news. Call us when you can." Brooklyn sighed, realizing that her new reality was just beginning to unfold. But as she organized her students' work on the coffee table and thought about Harrington coming to help her, she felt a strange peace. Maybe Madison was right. Some things were worth the risk. Looking at one of her students' paintings, a colorful sunset that completely ignored the rules of perspective, Brooklyn smiled. As he always said in his classes, Sometimes the best works of art come when we allow ourselves to go outside the box. Perhaps the same principle would apply to love. The next morning, Brooklyn faced his first big test, returning to school. Despite the photographers who still persisted at the entrance to her building, she maintained her routine. He wore his favorite jeans, a colorful blouse that his students loved, and took the subway as he always did. The difference was the discreet security that Harrington had insisted on providing, following her at a distance. Brooklyn had only agreed because he didn't want the media to disturb his students. When she arrived at PS 234, Principal Thompson was waiting for her in her office. She was a pragmatic woman who Brooklyn always admired for her dedication to school. "Miss Hayes," she began, adjusting her tortoiseshell glasses, "I've received dozens of calls from concerned parents this morning." "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Brooklyn replied sincerely. "It was never my intention to bring this kind of attention to the school." Actually, the principal surprised her with a small smile. Most of the parents are excited. Apparently, having a teacher dating a billionaire who promotes art and technology is great for our image. The school board has already received 3 grant proposals for the art department. Brooklyn blinked, stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Tell her you will continue to be the excellent teacher you always were," Thompson replied. "And maybe mention to your boyfriend that our computer lab needs an update." Leaving the principal's office, Brooklyn found her students more agitated than usual. Many had seen his photo in the newspapers or on the internet, and questions were inevitable. "Miss Hayes, is it true that you went to Paris yesterday?" asked Lisa, one of her most curious students. "Yes, that's true," Brooklyn answered honestly. "And do you know what I saw there? Amazing art that gave me lots of ideas for our next classes." The mention of new artistic projects immediately redirected the class's attention. Soon the children were more interested in his ideas for recreating famous works than in his personal life. During lunch, Brooklyn received a text from Harrington. "How's your day going? Surviving the paparazzi?" She smiled as she replied, "Surprisingly well. Apparently our relationship could result in a new computer lab for the school." "Should I feel used?" he joked. "Totally, but for a good cause." In the afternoon, while her students were working on their projects, Brooklyn noticed some flashes through the classroom windows. Immediately, the discreet security guard Harrington had assigned moved to block the photographer's view. "Miss Hayes," called Tommy, one of her sharpest students, "are those men with cameras here because of you?" Brooklyn took a deep breath, deciding to be honest. "Yes, Tommy. Sometimes when people start dating someone famous, other people get really curious about their lives." "Like my mother's magazines that talk about celebrities?" asked another student. "Exactly. But you know what's more important than being in magazines?" Brooklyn asked, seeing a teaching opportunity. "The art you are creating now, because true art comes from the heart, not from cameras." The rest of the day passed without any major incidents. When classes ended, Brooklyn found Harrington waiting for her in the school parking lot, leaning against her discreet car. Well, as discreet as an Aston Martin could be. "I thought we could have dinner," he said, opening the door for her. "I know a quiet place on the Upper West Side." Along the way, Brooklyn talked about her day, the surprisingly positive reactions, and how her students handled the situation. Harrington listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the school and its projects. "You know," he commented as they parked, "you're handling all of this a lot better than I expected." "It's because I have a great example every day," she replied. "My students constantly teach me about adaptation and resilience. When a painting doesn't turn out as planned, they don't give up. They just transform it into something new." The restaurant was a small Italian bistro, tucked away on a side street. The owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe, greeted Harrington like an old friend. "This has been my haunt for years," Harrington explained, as they settled into a discreet table in the back. "One of the few places in New York where I can just be myself." "And now you're sharing it with me," Brooklyn observed softly. "I'm sharing everything with you," he replied, his intense green eyes fixed on hers, including the complicated parts of my life that I've always kept hidden. Dinner was intimate and delicious, with Giuseppe bringing dishes that weren't even on the menu. Between mouthfuls of homemade pasta and sips of red wine, Brooklyn and Harrington continued to build their own world, one that existed in the space between their very different universes. "I have a board meeting tomorrow," Harrington mentioned as they shared a key lime pie. "But then, I'd like to take you somewhere special." "Don't tell me we're going to Tokyo," Brooklyn joked. "No," he laughed. "Something closer, and more personal." By the end of the night, when Harrington dropped her off at her apartment, the photographers had already left. On the sidewalk, protected by the darkness of the night, they shared a kiss that seemed to hold promises of 1,000 future adventures. "Good evening, Professor Hayes," he murmured against her lips. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," she replied with a smile before entering her building. In her apartment, Brooklyn realized that for the first time since all this madness started, she didn't feel afraid of the future. As he told his students, sometimes the best works of art come from the most unexpected accidents. The day after the night at the Italian bistro, Brooklyn found a bouquet of pink peonies on her desk in the classroom. The card simply said, "To more happy accidents. H." She smiled, remembering their conversation about how the best moments sometimes come from the unexpected. The morning went by normally, with her students working on their Van Gogh-inspired art projects. Photographers had dwindled considerably, especially after the school issued an official statement banning any media in the vicinity during class hours. During lunch break, Madison showed up at school unexpectedly. "I brought something you need to see," her friend said, sitting next to her in the empty staff room. Madison opened her tablet, showing a series of online articles. "The narrative is changing." Brooklyn scanned the headlines. Where there had previously been sensational speculation about fortune hunters and fairy tales, now more substantial reports were appearing. "Art teacher revolutionizes teaching method in public school." "Relationship with CEO of Caltech brings attention to the importance of artistic education." "Harrington had something to do with it?" Brooklyn asked, raising an eyebrow. Madison shook her head. "In fact, it was her own students. Some parents started posting online about her innovative teaching methods, and the story took on a life of its own. People are more interested in the dedicated teacher who is changing lives than in her romance with the billionaire." Brooklyn felt his heart warm. This was exactly how she wanted to be seen, for her work, not her relationship. "And there's more," Madison continued. "Caltech announced a new art and technology integration program for public schools today. Apparently your boyfriend was quite inspired after spending an afternoon grading schoolwork with you." "He didn't tell me anything about it," Brooklyn commented, surprised. "Probably because I wanted it to be a surprise. The official announcement will be made tonight at the Caldwell Foundation benefit dinner." Brooklyn froze. "What charity dinner?" Madison bit her lip. "Oh, he hasn't invited you yet. It's a super important annual event. All the big names in technology and philanthropy will be there." Before Brooklyn could process this information, her phone buzzed with a message from Harrington. "I spent the morning thinking about you. Can I still take you to that special place tonight?" Brooklyn quickly responded, "Of course, but I heard about a certain charity dinner." His response came almost instantly. "I wanted to tell you in person. It's important to me, but only if you feel comfortable going." "When is it?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. And yes, I've already arranged a dress. Madison helped me with the measurements again." Brooklyn laughed, typing, "You two need to stop plotting behind my back." When classes ended, Brooklyn found Harrington's driver waiting for her. The car took her through the city until they reached a quiet residential neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. To their surprise, they stopped in front of a modest 2-story house. Harrington was waiting for her on the porch, dressed casually in jeans and a blue shirt, a rare sight from the always impeccable CEO. "Welcome to my true home," he said, taking her hand. "Not the penthouse apartment that everyone knows, but the place where I actually live." Brooklyn looked around, noticing the details that made the place feel truly lived in. A bicycle leaning against the side of the house, a newspaper folded on the rocking chair, potted plants that needed pruning. "Why here?" she asked as he guided her inside. "Because after sharing your world with me, your classroom, your students, your passion for teaching, I wanted to share a part of my world that very few people know about." The inside of the house was cozy and surprisingly normal. Family photos on the walls, books stacked on shelves, a kitchen that actually looked like it was used. "My parents lived here," Harrington explained, leading her around the room. "After they passed away, I couldn't let go of the place. It ended up becoming my refuge when I needed to escape the expectations of the corporate world." Brooklyn stopped in front of a photo of a teenage Harrington with his parents. "You look happy here." "It was," he confirmed. "And it's still the only place where I feel completely myself." Harrington hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Brooklyn, I know our relationship is evolving quickly, and tomorrow night will be your first big public event as my girlfriend. I wanted you to see this place first. Understand that behind the CEO of CaldTech, there is just a man who also needs a place to call home." Brooklyn felt the weight of that moment, of the trust he was placing in her by showing this very private part of his life. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. "There's one more thing." Harrington smiled, guiding her to a door at the end of the hallway. "I thought you might like this." Upon opening the door, Brooklyn was speechless. It was a fully equipped art studio, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the back garden. "It was my father's office," Harrington explained. "I had it converted into a studio when I found out that you were an artist as well as a teacher. I thought maybe you could use it when you wanted a space of your own to create." Brooklyn felt tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't just a grand gesture. It was deeply personal, a way of intertwining their worlds in a meaningful way. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face him. "This is all perfect." That night they cooked together in the kitchen, talking about the art and technology program that would be announced the next day, about the charity dinner, about their fears and hopes for the future. It was a moment of normalcy amid the turmoil their lives had become, and Brooklyn found it increasingly difficult to imagine her life without Harrington in it. The dress that Harrington and Madison had chosen for Brooklyn was an Alexander McQueen in sapphire blue, with a cut that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. Standing in front of the mirror in her apartment, Brooklyn barely recognized the woman staring back at her. "You look stunning," Madison said, adjusting the delicate necklace that completed her look. "But you still look like yourself." "That's the problem," Brooklyn sighed. "What if I'm not sophisticated enough for this event? I don't know anything about charity dinners." "But he knows all about art and education," Madison recalled. "And that's what the program that will be announced today is all about." The sound of heels against the wooden floor echoed as Brooklyn walked to the window. The photographers were still down there, but fewer in number. In recent days, the headlines had changed tone, focusing more on her work as an educator than her personal life. "Harrington said there's going to be press at the event," Brooklyn commented, feeling a knot in his stomach. "That's why we hired a press secretary for you," a familiar voice sounded from the door. It was Harrington, impeccable in his tuxedo, his green eyes sparkling at the sight of her. "Press officer?" Brooklyn asked, surprised. "Claire Montgomery," an elegant, middle-aged woman introduced herself, entering just behind Harrington. "I will help you navigate the world of media without losing your authenticity." Brooklyn gave Harrington a questioning look. "Don't you think you're exaggerating a little?" "Not when I know there will be at least 50 journalists trying to turn your every word into a headline," he replied, moving closer to kiss her softly. "Additionally, Claire has specific experience in helping public figures keep their social work focused." "What happens tonight is too important to leave to chance," Claire explained, her tone professional but gentle. "The art and technology program can transform the lives of thousands of students. We need to ensure that this is the story everyone tells tomorrow." Over the next 30 minutes, Claire instructed Brooklyn on how to answer difficult questions, how to deflect sensitive topics, and most importantly, how to stay focused on the educational program. Madison watched everything with an amused smile, clearly approving of the meticulous preparation. "Remember," Claire concluded, "you are not an accessory in Harrington Caldwell's life. You are a respected educator whose work inspired a revolutionary initiative. That's how we want you to be seen." On the way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the dinner would be held, Brooklyn felt Harrington's hand gently squeeze hers. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but more excited to see people's reactions when they hear about the program. Do you have any idea how many schools could benefit from this?" Harrington's smile widened. "That's why I fell in love with you," he said softly. "Even though you're facing your own moments of pressure, you only think about how you can help others." Brooklyn froze, her heart racing. It was the first time he had mentioned the word love. Before he could fully process the moment, the car stopped, and flashbulbs began to go off outside. "Ready?" Harrington asked, his hand already on the doorknob. Brooklyn took a deep breath, remembering Claire's words. "Ready." The Met's red carpet was packed with celebrities, business people, and public figures. Brooklyn felt all eyes turn to her as Harrington helped her out of the car. Interestingly, his presence by her side, firm and protective, made her feel safer. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Hayes," the reporters called. "This way." With surprising grace, Brooklyn navigated the initial interviews, staying focused on the educational program whenever possible. Claire, discreetly positioned nearby, occasionally made subtle signs of approval. Inside the museum, the Great Hall was transformed into a modern fairy tale setting. Elegantly decorated tables dotted the space, while student-created digital artwork was projected onto the historic walls. "That one over there," Harrington pointed to one of the projections, "was made by one of your students. Tommy, right?" Brooklyn felt tears forming as he recognized the work of his most dedicated student. "Did you include their works in the exhibition?" "Of course," he smiled. "What better way to showcase the program's potential than through the eyes of children themselves?" The night progressed like a dream. Brooklyn met CEOs who spoke enthusiastically about investing in arts education, celebrities who offered to speak at public schools, and politicians interested in expanding the program to other states. During dinner, sitting between Harrington and a famous film director who couldn't stop talking about the program's potential, Brooklyn realized she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not as a billionaire's girlfriend, but as an educator whose love of art was helping to create real change. When Harrington stood up to give his speech, Brooklyn felt his heart swell with pride. He spoke passionately about the importance of bringing art and technology together, about how creativity was essential to innovation, and about how a certain art teacher had made him see the world in a completely new way. "Tonight," he concluded, "we are not just launching a program, we are starting a revolution in the way we educate our children. And it all started because a dedicated teacher showed me that sometimes the most unexpected accidents can lead to the greatest discoveries." The morning after the charity dinner, Brooklyn woke up to her phone ringing incessantly. News about the art and technology program had dominated the headlines, and her inbox was filled with emails from schools across the country interested in participating in the initiative. "You became a celebrity in the education world overnight," Madison commented during their morning call. "I just saw 3 different news channels talking about how an art teacher revolutionized Caltech's approach to education." Brooklyn sighed, wrapped in her robe as she watched the city from her apartment window. "It's surreal. Last night, a senator asked me if I would be willing to participate in a panel on education reform in Washington." "And what did you answer?" "That my priority is my students in New York," Brooklyn replied, a smile forming on his lips at the thought of his children. "But I would be happy to contribute ideas for education policies that benefit all schools." The sound of a notification interrupted the conversation. It was a message from Harrington. "Turn on the TV today. You're on all the channels. P.S. You look beautiful in the photos." Brooklyn quickly turned on the television and nearly spilled his coffee cup. There she was, elegant in her sapphire blue dress, speaking confidently about the importance of integrating art and technology in education. The reports described her as an education visionary and the force behind Caldtech's new initiative. "Mad, I need to hang up," she said quickly. "I have to get ready for school." Arriving at PS 234, Brooklyn found a different scene than usual. Reporters were kept at a distance by security, but there was a different energy in the air. Teachers and staff greeted her with knowing smiles, and her students seemed especially excited. "Miss Hayes," Tommy exclaimed as she entered the classroom, "I saw my drawing on TV. It was in the important museum." "Yes, I was," she smiled, placing her bag on the table. "And you know why? Because your art is special, Tommy, just like the art of each of you." The morning passed with a mixture of normal classes and explanations about the new program that would soon be implemented at the school. The kids were fascinated by the idea of using special tablets to create digital art, and Brooklyn found herself renewed by their enthusiasm. During lunch break, Principal Thompson appeared in her office with a beaming smile. "The school board has just approved our participation as a pilot school for the program," he announced, "and several sponsors have already reached out offering additional resources." Brooklyn felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "This is amazing. When can we start?" "Next week. And Brooklyn." The principal hesitated for a moment. "I know your personal life is in the spotlight right now, but I want you to know that the school is completely behind you. What you and Mr. Caldwell are doing for public education is revolutionary." After classes, Brooklyn found Harrington waiting for her in the parking lot, casually leaning against her car while checking emails on her phone. Some parents walking out with their children stopped to look but kept a respectful distance. "Surprised to see me?" he asked, putting his phone away and giving you a warm smile. "Always," she replied, moving in for a soft kiss. "I thought you'd be busy dealing with the repercussions of the show." "I am. That's why I came to get you. We need to talk about some interesting developments." In the car, Harrington explained that the success of the ad had exceeded all expectations. Investors and politicians from across the country wanted to be part of the initiative, and several universities had already shown interest in studying the program's impact. "The problem," he continued as they drove toward Greenwich, "is that some Caldtech board members are concerned." "Worried about what?" Brooklyn asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "With the fact that I'm mixing personal life with business. They fear that our relationship could compromise the objectivity of the program." Brooklyn felt her heart sink. "They want us to break up?" "Not exactly," Harrington replied, his voice strained. "They suggested that it would be better if you were not directly involved in implementing the program. They want to bring in outside experts to lead the project." The silence that followed was heavy. Brooklyn looked out the window, watching the landscape change as he processed the information. All their enthusiasm for the show's success seemed to be poisoned by corporate politics. "What did you answer?" she finally asked. Harrington parked his car in front of his Greenwich home before responding. He said if they want the program, you come with it. Your vision and experience are fundamental to the success of the initiative. But can't that harm your position in the company? "Brooklyn," he turned to face her. "I spent years building Caldtech, thinking only about the numbers, the growth, the profit. You showed me that there is a greater purpose. I'm not going to let corporate politics destroy something that can make a real difference in the lives of thousands of children." His words hit her with full force, making her realize how much their lives had become intertwined in such a short time. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the impact they could have together. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice firmer. "We proved them wrong," Harrington replied with determination. "We've shown that our relationship is not an obstacle, but rather the strength that makes it all possible." The morning after the revelation about the Caldtech board's resistance, Brooklyn entered his classroom with a mix of determination and apprehension. The newspaper headlines continued to celebrate the Arte and Tecnologia program, but now she knew that there were shadows behind the scenes that threatened the entire project. "Miss Hayes," Lisa exclaimed, running over to her desk with a tablet in her hand. "Look what I managed to do." The girl proudly showed a digital animation she had created at home, inspired by art classes. Lisa's enthusiasm was exactly what Brooklyn needed to see at that moment. It was a vivid reminder of why all this fighting was worth it. While helping the student refine some details of her animation, Brooklyn felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. It was a message from Claire, her publicist. Emergency meeting at 1 p.m. at Caltech. Board wants you to attend. Brooklyn felt his stomach drop. It was one thing for Harrington to defend her participation in the program, but quite another to personally face a group of executives who saw her as a threat to their business. During the break, she called Madison. "They can't just write you off," Madison stated with conviction. "You're the public face of the show now. The press would destroy them if they tried to push you away." "I don't want this to turn into a PR war," Brooklyn sighed, watching his students playing in the courtyard through the window. "I just want to do what's best for the kids." "Maybe that's exactly what you need to tell them," Madison suggested. At 1 p.m. sharp, Brooklyn entered the imposing Caltech building in Manhattan. Wearing a blazer over her usual floral teacher dress, she tried to project a confidence she didn't fully feel. Harrington was waiting for her in the lobby. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, taking her hand. "I can deal with them alone." "No," Brooklyn replied firmly. "If we're going to prove that our relationship doesn't compromise the program, we need to face this together." The board meeting room was intimidating, with its glass walls and panoramic view of New York. 12 executives in impeccable suits surveyed Brooklyn with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Miss Hayes," began Richard Morrison, the board chair, "we appreciate your contribution to the development of the Art and Technology program. However, there are concerns about potential conflicts of interest." Brooklyn took a deep breath, remembering the excited faces of his students. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your concerns, but I would like to share something with you." She opened her bag and took out a folder. "These are letters I've received in the last 24 hours from teachers, principals, and parents across the country. People who saw our program as a chance to revolutionize the way we teach art and technology." Passing the cards across the table, Brooklyn continued, "I'm not here as Harrington Caldwell's girlfriend. I'm here as an educator who has spent the last 5 years watching bright children lose opportunities due to a lack of resources and innovation in the education system." The room remained silent as council members reviewed the letters. Brooklyn noticed some of them exchanging thoughtful glances. "What about objectivity in implementing the program?" asked an executive at the end of the table. "That's why I suggest we establish an independent evaluation committee," Brooklyn responded promptly. "Educators, technology experts, and school administrators who can monitor and evaluate program progress without any interference from me or Caltech." Harrington, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. "The board needs to understand that the success of this program does not just depend on technology or financial resources. It depends on people who truly understand the needs of classrooms. Brooklyn brings this vital perspective." The discussion continued for another hour, with difficult questions and heated debates. Brooklyn stood his ground, answering each question with a mix of educational passion and administrative pragmatism that clearly impressed some board members. Finally, Morrison stood up. "Ms. Hayes, the board will deliberate and communicate its decision later today. We appreciate your candor and commitment." In the elevator descending from the 50th floor, Brooklyn finally allowed his hands to shake. "How do you think it went?" he asked Harrington. "You were amazing," he replied, pulling her into a hug. "It showed exactly why I fell in love with you, your passion, your intelligence, your dedication to your students." Brooklyn buried her face in his chest, taking in his warmth and strength. "What if they still rule against us?" "Then we'll find another way," Harrington stated with conviction. "There are other technology companies, other ways to implement the program. The important thing is that we are not going to give up." Back at school for afternoon classes, Brooklyn found her students even more excited about the program. Tommy had created a small study group where the kids shared ideas about how they wanted to use technology in their art projects. Watching them argue animatedly, Brooklyn felt a certainty grow in his heart. Regardless of the council's decision, she had started something that could not be easily stopped. The seed of change was already planted in the minds and hearts of these children. At 5 p.m., as he was organizing his desk to leave, his phone rang. It was Claire. "The board voted," her advisor said, making Brooklyn catch her breath. "They want to see you again tomorrow to discuss the next steps for the program." Brooklyn closed her eyes, letting relief wash over her. His phone vibrated again, a message from Harrington. "Dinner to celebrate? I know a little restaurant in Brooklyn you'll love." With a smile, she replied, "Only if we promise not to talk business for at least an hour." "Deal. Catch you in 30 minutes. P.S. You were magnificent today." News that the Caltech board had agreed to keep Brooklyn as an integral part of the art and technology program spread quickly through the education community. In less than a week, his classroom turned into an innovation hub, with teachers from other schools visiting to observe his teaching methodology. "It's like we created a movement without realizing it," Brooklyn commented to Harrington during one of their impromptu lunches in his classroom. He had brought Thai food and was now sitting comfortably in one of the small student chairs, looking curiously at ease in this environment so different from his usual meeting rooms. "You created a movement," he corrected, looking at the colorful drawings decorating the walls. "I only provided the tools." The new independent evaluation committee had begun its work, and to the surprise of many on the board, its first recommendation was to expand the program more quickly than initially planned. The preliminary evidence of positive impact was impossible to ignore. "Miss Hayes!" Tommy burst into the room, interrupting the peaceful moment. He stopped abruptly when he saw Harrington, his eyes widening in awe. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's okay, Tommy." Brooklyn smiled, waving him closer. "What did you want to show me?" The boy stepped forward timidly, holding his tablet. "I used that new program Mr. Caldwell gave us to create something special." He rotated the screen, revealing stunning digital animation that blended elements of Van Gogh with modern technology. Harrington leaned forward, genuinely interested. "That's extraordinary, Tommy. How did you get that motion effect in the stars?" The boy's face lit up at the technical question, and soon he was excitedly explaining the details of the creative process. Brooklyn watched the interaction with a full heart, realizing how Harrington had become a natural part of her school world. Later that day, during a meeting with Claire to discuss future performances of the show, Brooklyn received an unexpected call from Columbia University. "We would like to invite you to give a talk on the integration of art and technology in modern education," the coordinator of the education department explained. "His innovative methods have attracted a lot of attention in academia." Brooklyn felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. "I don't know if I'm qualified to give lectures at a university." "On the contrary," Claire interjected, having heard the conversation on speakerphone, "you are exactly the kind of educator who can inspire the next generation of teachers." That night, at their Greenwich house, Brooklyn shared her worries with Harrington as they prepared dinner together, a new routine they had developed to maintain some normalcy in their increasingly hectic lives. "What if I'm not academic enough for them?" she asked, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. Harrington stopped stirring the sauce he was making and turned to her. "Brooklyn, you have something many academics will never have: real experience and proven results. Your ideas aren't just theory. You put them into practice every day." "But—" "No buts," he interrupted her gently, taking the knife from her hand and pulling her closer. "Remember what you told me when we faced the council? That it wasn't about titles or positions, but about making a difference in children's lives?" Brooklyn nodded, relaxing in his arms. "The same applies here," he continued. "Your talk might inspire future teachers to think differently about education. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" She smiled, remembering her own ambitions when she was in college. "You're getting really good at using my own words against me, you know? I learned from the best," he laughed, stealing a kiss before returning to the stove. Over the next few days, Brooklyn immersed herself in preparing her talk, determined to turn her practical experience into valuable insights for future educators. His evenings were divided between planning lessons, developing the art and technology program, and rehearsing his presentation, with Harrington often serving as his test audience. "You know what's most amazing?" she commented one night as they reviewed her notes together in the art studio he had created for her. "How this all started with a simple blind date." Harrington smiled, that smile that still made his heart race. Simple is the last word I would use to describe that night, or anything about you, really. The Columbia University auditorium was packed when Brooklyn took the stage for his first academic lecture. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the microphone, but as he looked across the front row and saw Harrington smiling encouragingly, he felt his confidence grow. "Art has always been a form of human expression," she began, her voice steady. "But in an increasingly digitized world, we need to rethink how we teach creativity to the next generation." Over the next hour, Brooklyn shared his experiences, showing practical examples of how the integration of traditional art and technology was transforming his classroom. The audience's questions were enthusiastic, and she realized that her initial concerns about not being academic enough were unfounded. After the talk, while talking to a group of university professors interested in the program, Brooklyn noticed Claire approaching with a worried expression. "We need to talk," his advisor said discreetly. "In private." In the empty hallway of the historic building, Claire showed Brooklyn her tablet. It was an article from an influential gossip blog, with the provocative title, "Romance with Teacher Threatens Technology Empire. Caltech Shares Fall After Announcement of Educational Program." "Some investors are questioning whether Harrington is letting emotions get in the way of business," Claire explained softly. "The share value has fallen 12% since the program was announced." Brooklyn felt his stomach drop. "But the program is having positive results. Preliminary evaluations show significant improvement in student engagement." "Yeah, but Wall Street doesn't care much about student engagement," Claire sighed. "They want profits, and some analysts are suggesting that investment in public education is a waste of corporate resources." Before Brooklyn could respond, Harrington appeared in the hallway. One look at their expressions was enough for him to understand that something was wrong. "Have you seen the news?" he asked, his voice calm but tense. Brooklyn nodded, suddenly feeling guilty. "Harrington, if this is hurting the company—" "Don't even finish that sentence," he interrupted her firmly. "The program is more important than temporary fluctuations in the stock market. But your position as CEO, you can be strengthened by this." A new voice joined the conversation. It was Richard Morrison, the chairman of Caltech, who had apparently also attended the talk. "Mr. Morrison," Brooklyn began, surprised by his presence. "Miss Hayes, your performance today was impressive," he said, approaching the group. "And as for stocks, well, not every investment gives immediate returns. True value sometimes takes time to be recognized." Morrison took an envelope out of his pocket and handed it to Brooklyn. "The board just approved expanding the program to 50 more schools next semester. Your teaching methods will be instrumental in training the new participating teachers." Brooklyn opened the envelope with shaking hands, quickly reading the official document. It was a proposal to create a training institute dedicated to the integration of art and technology in education, with her as a pedagogical director. "But what about my students?" was his first concern. "You can maintain your regular classes while we develop the institute," Morrison explained. "In fact, your classroom would be a perfect laboratory for testing and refining new methods." Harrington watched the scene with a proud smile, but Brooklyn could see the tension in his shoulders. She knew that despite his confident words, he was worried about the repercussions on the company. Later that night, as they walked through Columbia's brightly lit campus, Brooklyn finally expressed his fears. "What if I don't measure up? What if all this investment in education actually hurts Caltech?" Harrington stopped walking and made her turn to him. "Brooklyn, when I met you, I was tired of making decisions based solely on numbers and profits. You showed me that there is a greater purpose. And you know what? The best investors, the ones who really understand business, know that companies with purpose are more valuable in the long term. How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen the impact you have. not just on your students, but on everyone you meet. Today, in that talk, you weren't just sharing teaching methods. You were inspiring a new generation of educators to think differently. Brooklyn felt tears forming in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder how we got here. From a blind date to all of this. Maybe because some people are destined to find each other, he replied softly, wiping away a tear that escaped. Some connections are too strong to ignore, no matter how many obstacles get in the way. The sound of approaching footsteps made them part slightly. It was Claire, with more news. The video of your talk already has over 100,000 views, she announced, showing her phone. And mentions of the show on social media are overwhelmingly positive. I think we've found our winning narrative. Brooklyn smiled, remembering how it all started, with a nervous art teacher getting into a limo, with no idea what the future held. Now, here she was, on the threshold of something much bigger than herself. So, Harrington asked, offering his arm, ready to change the world of education? As long as I can do it myself, she replied, linking her arm through his. I wouldn't have it any other way. He smiled, and together they walked through the autumn night, planning a future neither of them could have imagined just a few months earlier. 6 months after the talk at Columbia, Brooklyn Hayes looked out at his transformed classroom through the window of Caltech's newly opened Institute of Art and Technology. The once modest space now housed state-of-the-art tablets and interactive screens, but maintained the warmth and creativity that had always characterized its teaching environment. Thinking about how everything has changed? Harrington's voice brought her back to the present. He had just returned from a board meeting where the latest financial projections were presented. Actually, I was thinking about how some things stay exactly the same, she replied, pointing to Tommy, who was helping a group of new students with a digital animation tool. The essence of what we do here hasn't changed. It's just grown. The last few months had been a roller coaster of emotions and achievements. The art and technology program was now in more than 100 schools across the country, and the preliminary results were impressive. Increased student engagement, improved cognitive and creative skills, and a renewed interest in careers that blended art and technology. The company's stock has completely recovered, Harrington commented, standing next to her. In fact, they're higher than ever. Apparently, investing in education wasn't such a bad idea after all. Brooklyn smiled, remembering her initial concerns. Who knew doing the right thing could be good for business? The sound of children's laughter filled the hallway as a group of students ran past, carrying their digital creations to show their parents waiting in the lobby. It was exhibition day at the Institute, a monthly event that had become a beloved tradition in the community. Madison is organizing everything downstairs. Claire appeared in the doorway, her tablet always in hand. The press has already arrived, and some important investors have also come to see the program in action. Brooklyn nodded, unconsciously adjusting her necklace, a gift from Harrington to celebrate the Institute's success. Any special guidance for today? Just be yourself, Claire smiled. That's what everyone wants to see. As they walked down to the event, Brooklyn reflected on how her life had changed. He still lived in his Brooklyn apartment, still took the subway occasionally, much to the dismay of the security staff, and still spent most of his time teaching. But now his ideas and methods were impacting thousands of children across the country. The Institute's lobby was full of life. Digital and traditional artwork decorated the walls as students proudly presented their projects to an impressed audience. Richard Morrison, who had become one of the program's biggest advocates, was talking animatedly with a group of educators from other states. "Miss Hayes!" Tommy ran up to her, his eyes shining with excitement. "The university you mentioned? The one with the special digital art program? They want to use my project as an example in their promotional material." Brooklyn felt his heart swell with pride. Tommy, who previously could barely express himself in class, was now one of the program's most promising students. "That's amazing, Tommy. You deserve all the recognition." The afternoon progressed with presentations, demonstrations, and lively conversations about the future of arts education. In a quiet moment, Harrington pulled Brooklyn to a more private corner of the lobby. I have something to tell you, he said, a different gleam in his eyes. The board has just approved the international expansion of the program. Schools in London, Paris, and Tokyo have already expressed interest. Brooklyn felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. International? That's... wow. There's more, Harrington continued, taking her hands. They want you to lead the global implementation as executive director of the international program. But my class is here. You can keep your base in New York, he assured. Actually, that brings me to the second part of what I want to tell you. Harrington took a deep breath, and Brooklyn felt her heart speed up. These past few months have shown me that some people don't just change our lives. They transform the way we see the entire world. To Brooklyn's surprise, he knelt right there in the quiet corner of the lobby, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Brooklyn Hayes, you didn't just teach me the true meaning of success. You showed me what it means to live with purpose. Marry me? The ring was simple and elegant, with a small ethical diamond surrounded by sapphires, her favorite stone. Perfectly her, just like everything Harrington had done since they met. Yes, she replied, tears in her eyes. 1,000 times yes. The applause and whistles that followed revealed that their small audience had grown considerably. Madison was at the front, filming everything with a huge smile on her face. Claire was already on the phone, probably managing how the news would be released to the press. But Brooklyn only had eyes for Harrington as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I promise to keep being myself, he whispered, if you promise to never stop challenging me to be better. Deal, she smiled, pulling him into a kiss that was met with more applause. Tommy approached timidly, holding something in his hands. I made this for you, he said, handing over a tablet. On the screen, an animation showed 2 birds flying together, building a nest that gradually turned into a school full of little birds learning to fly. It's beautiful, Tommy, Brooklyn said, moved. Like you two, the boy replied simply. Different, but perfect together. As the celebration continued around her, Brooklyn realized that her blind date had turned into something much bigger than a simple romance. It was a story of how love can inspire change, of how different worlds can come together to create something extraordinary, and of how sometimes the most unexpected accidents lead us exactly where we are supposed to be.